Welcome to the ERIS Report. My name is Daniel Fiverson. In this edition, we're going to continue our journey of ERIS through the houses and ERIS in the second house, with using Jane Fonda's chart as an example. In evolutionary astrology, we use the context of the person to overlay that on the chart rather than taking the chart and overlaying it on the person. And so in that regard, I would like to read her bio for you. And so then we're going to take a look at her chart and see how it expresses this bio that you're about to hear. And then I'm going to look at some historical transits to her chart at ERIS. So Jane Fonda was born on December 21st, 1937. She's an American actress, an activist, and former fashion model. And she studied acting under the tutelage of legendary Lee Strasberg. She's the winner of 2 Academy Awards, 2 British Academy of Film and Television BAFTA Awards, 7 Golden Globes, a Primetime Emmy, and 27 other award nominations. In her autobiography, My Life So Far, Fonda divides her life into 3 acts. Act 1 covers her often painful childhood. We'll talk about that. Her early films and her turbulent marriage to filmmaker Roger Vadim. In Act 2, she begins to discover her activism and discusses her marriages to Tom Hayden and Ted Turner. And in Act 3, she begins to confront her demons and tries to live her life in a more conscious way. As the daughter of acclaimed actor Henry Fonda, she seemed destined to follow in her famous father's footsteps. She attended boarding school at Vassar College before dropping out to head to Paris to study art. She seemed to have been driven by a childhood plagued by dysfunction. Her father was reportedly cold and distant. In My Life So Far, she relates this story. Once Dad had come into the city and took us to the circus. A New York columnist I knew, who knew our family and who was there, was quoted as saying, quote, "I remember sitting in a box at the circus a few months after Mr. Roberts opened. Hank sat just to my right. With him were Jane and Peter, and not once during the entire performance did he say a word to either child. And either the children knew enough to say nothing, or they might have been too intimidated to speak. He didn't buy them hot dogs, cotton candy, or treat them to souvenirs. When the circus was over, they simply stood up and walked out. I felt sorry for all 3 of them." Unquote. In 1950, when she was only 12, her mother committed suicide while she was under psychiatric care. In 2014, Jane Fonda revealed that her mother had been sexually abused as a child before eventually committing suicide at 42. Her troubled childhood led Fonda to a battle with eating disorders that haunted her for years. Fonda made her acting debut on Broadway in 1960, for which she received a nomination for the Tony Award, and made her screen debut later the same year. In 1982, she released her first exercise video, Jane Fonda's Workout, which became the highest-selling VHS of the 20th century. It would be the first of 22 such videos over the next 13 years, collectively selling over 17 million copies. Fonda remarried 3 times, admitting that she allowed each of her husbands to reinvent her. Reinvention is a word we'll come back to. Her first husband was Barbarella director Roger Vadim in 1965. Vadim made her into the sex kitten role model after French bombshell Brigitte Bardot. Her open marriage with Vadim became too stressful, and they divorced in 1973. Fonda's marriage to Vadim and life in Paris, however, exposed her to leftist, war-opposing French intellectuals and introduced her to a lifelong passion for political activism. Following the dissolution of her marriage to Vadim, Fonda returned to the US and connected with activist and eventual California Senator Tom Hayden, who was also one of the Chicago 7. They married in 1973. During Fonda's years with Hayden, they continued their fight for justice and democracy. In 1990, Fonda and Hayden announced that while their political partnership would remain, their marriage would not. 1 year later, in 91, Fonda married media mogul and CNN founder Ted Turner and retired from acting. Fonda would later reveal that the marriage ate her alive, and she divorced Turner in 2001. 8 years later, she returned to Broadway in 2009 after a 49-year absence from the stage and earned a nomination for a Tony Award. Fonda currently stars in the Netflix comedy series Grace and Frankie, which earned her nominations for a Primetime Emmy Award and 3 Screen Actors Guild Awards. Jane Fonda and Lily Tomlin have a real-life friendship that spans decades since they appeared together with Dolly Parton in 9 to 5 in 1980. Fonda was a highly visible political activist in the counterculture movement. For a decade, starting in 1963, Fonda engaged in political activism, supporting the civil rights movement and in opposition to the Vietnam War. Jane Fonda embodied the artistic, political, and sexual upheavals that rocked America and the world, and she became a force in the anti-Vietnam War movement and personified women's liberation. She supported the Alcatraz Island occupation by Native American Indians in 1969, which intended to call attention to the government's failure regarding treaty rights and Native American sovereignty. She was photographed sitting on a North Vietnamese anti-aircraft gun in 1972, on a 1972 visit to Hanoi, during which she gained the nickname Hanoi Jane. During this time, she was effectively blacklisted in Hollywood. She has also protested the Iraq War and violence against women. In the early 1970s, she supported Huey Newton and Black Panthers, stating, quote, "Revolution is an act of love. We are the children of the revolution, born to be rebels. It runs in our blood." She called the Black Panthers, quote, "a revolutionary vanguard. We must support them with love and money, propaganda, and risk." She's a feminist and environmental activist. In 2005, along with Gloria Steinem, she co-founded the Women's Media Center, working to amplify women's voices in the media through advocacy, media, and leadership training. In a 2017 interview with Brie Larson, published by People magazine, Fonda stated, "One of the great things the women's movement has done is to make us realize that rape and abuse are not our fault. We were violated, and it's not right. I've been raped, I've been sexually abused as a child, and I've been fired because I wouldn't sleep with my boss. I always thought it was my fault. I didn't do or say the right thing. I know young girls who've been raped and didn't even know it was rape. They think it must be because I said no the wrong way." Fonda has publicly shown her support for the LGBTQ community throughout her career. In August 2021, Fonda, the cast of Grace and Frankie, and other advocates joined to support a fundraiser hosted by the Los Angeles LGBT community to help community members during the COVID-19 pandemic. In October 2019, Fonda was arrested 4 times in consecutive weeks, protesting climate change with Grace and Frankie co-star Sam Waterston and actor Ted Danson. In a 2018 interview, Fonda stated that up to the age of 62, she had always felt that she had to seek the validation of men to prove to herself that she had value as a person, something she attributes to her mother's early death, leaving her without a female role model. Consequently, despite her professional success, she attached herself to alpha males, and we're going to see some of them, some of whom reinforced her feelings of inadequacy. Fonda said that she came to see that attitude as a failing of the men in her life. So, who is Eris? Eris was named after the goddess of strife and discord. One version of this Genesis says that she was a primordial being, actually born from the primordial gods Night, Nyx, and Air, Erebus, which emerged directly from the chaos. But a second version says that she's the sister of Eris, the Greek goddess of war. The mythology has never really resolved this discrepancy. Maybe there were two, maybe she was both somehow. At first, her working name was Xena, warrior goddess, which was the name that was chosen by Mike Brown, who was the leader of the team at Palomar at her discovery. And it was a name that he wanted to have a female goddess, and Xena was one of his favorite goddesses, though she was really only a television personality. Her discovery upset the worlds of astronomy and astrology alike. She did not start the Trojan War. She is blamed for it. She threw the apple and started the argument between the three goddesses, Aphrodite, Hera, and Pallas Athena. But there is suggestions that perhaps it was Helen who deserted her husband, Menelaus, the king of Sparta, and ran off with Paris. Or the Iliad tells tales, and it describes situations where perhaps it was the gods themselves, Hera and Pallas Athena, who were jealous of having lost the conflict, or Zeus, who was angry at the Greeks for invading Troy, or Apollo, who was angry with the Greeks for attacking the Trojans. There's many different versions here. Eris, though, is an activist. She fights for justice above all else. She's about sacred rage, and she's the voice of those who cannot speak for themselves. She exposes the shadows that are hidden within us. And when Eris aspects our chart, when we have an Eris transit, there's no negotiation. She comes when there is a need, but not necessarily when we are ready. So I just want to talk very briefly about the houses themselves, since it's part of what we're doing has to do with that. It's not just about Eris, it's about the house that she resides in. So, just as a foundational understanding, the natural zodiac is a 12-letter multidimensional alphabet. The planet, the sign, and the house are all the same archetype. They just express in a different way. It's been said that perhaps the planet is the actor and the sign is the costume that the actor is wearing, and the house is the stage upon which it's all taking place. And each astrological house is an awakening. And each of the houses and sequences from Aries through Pisces unfolds as the evolution of consciousness. So the fire signs are about self-actualization, and the earth signs are substantiate, and the air signs intellectualize, and the water signs actually create self-awareness. And the evolution of consciousness really occurs through the water signs themselves. Cancer, Scorpio, and Pisces. All of the archetypes are expressed as both light and shadow. And the way that the archetype works is a reflection of the evolutionary state of the individual. Jeff Green really laid the groundwork for this in order to understand the chart, is we have to understand the evolutionary state of the individual itself. And this is not judgmental, it's observation. Observation and correlation. We all go through evolution. We came up from the animal kingdom and we move through all the stages of human evolution. And the way, the degree of our consciousness, are we in a consensus state? Are we in an individuated state? Recognize our creativity, recognize our differences. Are we in a spiritual state? Actually living according to natural law is going to determine how the archetypes are going to work in our chart. In a consensus state, the archetypes are going to seek security through the sameness with others. The soul and we are all about security. We act from a basis of is this going to make us more secure, or is something happening that's making us less secure? And the soul is the same way. The soul projects us down into time and space in order to learn about itself and to feel more secure as well. Security is the core desire of life as we know it. So in consensus, it's to be, like others, to have what others have, and to be like them, to find safety in the herd. Remember, we come up from the animal kingdom. In consensus state, we're still animals in the sense that the safety is being in the herd. In the individuated state, there's a rebellion against consensus thinking. We begin to recognize that we have our own individuality, a unique self-expression, and we reject societal norms according to our individual choice, or adopt. We make the choice. In the spiritualized state, life will be lived, as I said, according to natural law. Those laws which exist outside of time and space and are true in any time or place. So we're going to be looking at the second house today, and it's Venus's house. It's Taurus. It's Venus's inner expression, and if we could put a subtitle on the second house, it's what do I need to survive? It's about survival. It's about what's essential. And so it's Venus's inner expression. Venus is all about relationship. Her outer expression, as we know, is through Libra. It's our relationships with others. Her inner expression is our relationship with ourselves. This is life force of energy moving inward towards the center. It's a yin fixed earth dynamic. And as I said, it's our relationship with ourselves. And so it refers to our self-reliance, our self-esteem, our self-sufficiency. And it's clearly at its core level, the biological instinct for survival. It compromises what is personally essential and what translates into our values and priorities. What is essential to us forms our value system, and those values create our priorities. And astrologically, Venus correlates directly to magnetism. It's our magnetic frequency, and this is the law of attraction. It's an energetic frequency that we broadcast that corresponds to the quotient of our self-love. Do I love myself? Do I hate myself? Most of us are somewhere in the middle of that spectrum. And it's that frequency that we project out, and that's going to determine who and what we attract. That's the law of attraction. This frequency actually it projects into the seventh house of relationships, and it attracts people who are harmonious to our frequency. So, if we're carrying a payload of shadow material, low self-esteem, we attract someone who's magnetized to that vulnerability and probably is coming in to mine it and exploit it. And Taurus is the fable of the frog in the well. And that's a very simple story, that there's a frog that lives down at the bottom of a well. It's surrounded by all this sturdy, solid brick. It feels very safe. There's a little water down there. There are flies that come down there. It's got food source. It feels very secure, very self-satisfied, and very complete. And then one day, the Scorpio polarity to Taurus happens, because there's this huge deluge of water that rushes over and floods down into the well. And the frog thinks that the well is its whole world. It looks up, it sees the circle of the sky. Well, now the water comes in and flushes the frog up into the ground, out of the well, and it looks up and it sees the sky, and it says, "Oh my God, that wasn't all there is. There's much more." So this is the experience of Taurus and Scorpio, and it's part of what takes place in the second house. So in the second house, I said that each house is an awakening, and in the second house, the 5 physical senses are awakened. We recognize that we're perfectly imperfect, and we live in a perfectly imperfect world. We come to terms with it. Jeff Green would say, how can a perfect God create an imperfect world? God must be perfectly imperfect as well, and also evolving just as we are. In the second house, we establish self-reliance as a foundation for personal growth. And we identify that which is essential for our life support. The sign on the cusp, the planets in the second house, point to our sexual passions and persuasions. Sex is fundamental to survival for the species. Without it, we would not survive. There would be no evolution. There would be no species. There are 2 Eroses. There is an Eros who is also one of the primordial gods. It's called Thanos. It's depicted as an egg encircled by a snake, and this was the egg from which all of creation occurred. But Eros is the magnetism that binds the universe together. Love is the magnetism. Love is the attraction. Love is the bond of the universe. And the sign on the cusp of the second house, its ruler by sign, house, aspect, and any resident planets, and the location of Taurus in the chart correlate to our self-worth quotient and what we deem essential for our survival. I have another quote here from Jane. She says, perhaps you think that by intimacy, I mean sex. So allow me to clarify. Sex can be intimate, but it isn't necessarily so. Sometimes it's just the pleasurable stimulation of genitalia. By intimacy, I mean an attunement between two people who, despite each other's evident flaws, open their hearts fully to each other. This openness makes them vulnerable, so trust is key. So is self-love. It's impossible to be truly intimate with someone if you don't like yourself. And this kind of really tells the whole story. So one of the things that I have kind of uncovered, excuse me, I'm skipping ahead here. I've inserted this chart. You saw this before, and I posted this online a few weeks back. Not all the ephemerae have ERIS in the chart. So this is a very simple way to find out where your ERIS is if you aren't able to locate it in your chart. ERIS has been in Aries, in the sign of Aries, since 1927. It's got a 559-year cycle, spends 120 years, 20% of that orbit in the single sign of Aries. So it's 120 years, which is about where it is this year. It's just about 120, I think it's 121. And it's going to be in Aries until 2048. So you can see, if you just kind of look roughly, you can see here that ERIS spends about 3.5 to 4 years in each particular sign in Aries. It goes direct, goes retrograde and direct over every single point in Aries 3.5 times. And so if it's very simple mathematics, if you take 1940, take the year you were born and subtract 1927 from it, and then divide that number by 3.5, it will approximate the Aries degree in your chart. So what I started to say a minute or two ago is that as I'm working through ERIS through the houses, I'm discovering that there's an elemental correlation between the house that ERIS is in and some of the elements, the elemental influence in the chart itself. And clearly the rising sign is going to be determined. If we know that Aries is in Aries and it's in the second house, we're going to have a multitude of Capricorn, Aquarius, perhaps Sagittarius and Pisces rising signs. But this is not accidental, and it's not just because that's where Eris is. There's also a correlation, and I'm going to show you in Jane's chart of Earth in a second house Eris, in a lot of Earth in the chart, and Earth weaving through the chart. It doesn't mean it's all Earth, and it doesn't necessarily mean it's the primary element. It just means that that element is very active and persistent through the chart. So this chart that I drew here is from 444 charts that I took out of Solar Fire. 85% of the charts had Capricorn and Aquarius rising. Now, Saturn shares the rulership of both Saturn and, with Capricorn and Aquarius. It's the modern ruler of Capricorn and the traditional ruler of Aquarius. And so these rising signs amplify the Taurian placement of Eris in the chart. And as I look through Eris in each of the houses, I see the same significant correlation to Eris. And I'm going to show it to you in Jane's chart here. So let's see if I can get my annotation to work here without screwing everything up. All right, it's going to work. Okay, so you see, first of all, she has Capricorn rising, and then Capricorn also rules two houses, rules her first house and her second house. Then we have Saturn in Pisces, conjunct Eris, for starters, and Pisces is in Virgo, which is the dispositor of Saturn. So you see how the Earth is just building beneath her feet. Eris is ruled by Mars in Aquarius, again, Saturn co-ruler. And then we have Jupiter rising. I just clear some of this out, make it easier to see. We have Jupiter rising on her chart And Jupiter is the ruler for North Node in Sagittarius. And it is also the ruler for Sun in Sag. So we can see how this woven through the chart. And the ruler of her lunar south node in Gemini, which is ruled by, where's Mercury? Excuse me. Mercury took a detour. Mercury, you can't see it. I've got it covered up. Mercury in Capricorn, stationary. So we can say she's got, Sun and Moon in fire signs, Leo and Sagittarius, which is directing and actualizing all this grounded, generative Earth energy. But she has tremendous foundation of Earth, and it's why she's been able to establish the great career that she's had. And we'll come back to that. So, just going to read a couple of these quotes that I found really, really significant to understand her. So she said, have you ever noticed how we are presented with the same lessons over and over and over before a tipping point is reached? We can all speak to that, I'm sure. The lessons we need to learn circle around us, closing in until finally we are ready to take them in. Take them in. Those are the words that matter, because until I had embodied the lessons I was supposed to learn, absorbed them into the warp and woof of my being, they didn't take. They remained a head trip and didn't lead to changes in my behavior. The way that I kind of talk about this is that we, as we really learn through our direct emotional experience, just because we have an idea or somebody tells us something, the mental input really doesn't cause the change. It may start the process, but it's when we have some direct emotional experience that relates to that idea or that event or that circumstance that we change. She says, what Vadim gave me was huge. He reawakened me sexually. There was no doubt that part of my attraction to him and his life was because it was so different from the repressed style from which I had been raised. This was a quote in Vanity Fair. And then she said, some men have a hard time realizing that the women they're married to are strong and smart, and they have to diminish that because it makes them feel diminished. Too bad we have defined masculinity that is so easily shamed. And finally, it's never too late to change your life, never too late to be happy. So let's look at her chart. Just take a drink here. In evolutionary astrology, the entry point into the chart is going to be Pluto, because Pluto correlates to the soul. And so Jane has Pluto in Cancer, retrograde in her 7th house. 7th house is all about initiating many, many kinds of relationships in order, ones that mirror ourselves in some way, in order to reflect back to us so we can learn about ourselves. But Pluto in the 2nd house is also, in the 7th house, excuse me, also is about power and powerful people one-on-one. First of all, it's in Cancer, which refers back to her childhood and her family. She was born to royalty. She was actually a royalty. Her mother was royalty. Her mother was Lady Jane Seymour Fonda, who Henry Fonda married. So she was born a Lady Jane Seymour to her mother. But her father, more importantly, more significantly, was Hollywood royalty. Also, we have this Pluto in Cancer retrograde, I think, also refers back to the suicide of her mother when she was 12 years old. And she has had many, many relationships that defined herself, numerous prominent public relationships and powerful partners. Roger Vadim, Donald Sutherland, Tom Hayden, Ted Turner, Chris Christopherson. These are all men she's had relationships with. Jimmy Smits, Mick Jagger, and Geraldo Rivera. And the 7th house is Libra's house by archetype. So it's also about equality and balance. And so she fought for equality. She fought for a balance to empower herself with equality and balance her whole life. Saturn and Eris are trining. See, there's a trine here. Are trining Pluto. And so she learned to find her own self-authority and her own self-empowerment. With Pluto retrograde, she had to revisit her own power. She had to learn to stand in her own power again. And she became grounded in what was spiritually essential for humanity. Pallas Athena, which I referred to. Sorry about that. Keyboard got in the way, bad keyboard. Pallas Athena separates from a full phase opposition to Pluto. And most significantly, I covered it up, let me do this again. I didn't say this, Jupiter's at 0 degrees, Pallas is at 5 degrees of Aquarius. So here, she's got Capricorn on her ascendant. She is Capricorn rising. She meets the world with her authority. It's what she's learned to do as an individual. But behind all that is this Aquarian distance, this ability to push back and observe and learn. And it's also her rebelliousness, clearly. Coming forward through this Capricorn, expressing her self-empowerment through her rebellion. She was ready and willing to fight unflinchingly for what she believes. That's Pallas. Pallas would always try to achieve some kind of reconciliation. By failing that, she unflinchingly, without any qualm, would pick up her spear and go to battle. She was quite a warrior, and she had no fear of blood. Truly a very, very violent, fierce warrior, mythologically. Pluto separates from a first quarter trine, to Eris. And so, Eris is anchored here in her essential need for equality and unanimity in the world. But there's a sense of resentment that drives her forward, wanting her to nurture and heal the world's injustices. And this I think is Hygeia. We think of Hygeia in terms of healing physical illnesses, but I think that Jane was obsessed with healing the world around her. That she grew up in a difficult childhood. Her distant father, her mother who was gone, and all the problems that her mother had and she experienced through her childhood, drove her to want to make the world a better place for herself and not just for herself, also for others. You can see these green triangles here. These are yads. And a yod is the Hebrew word for a finger of God. And so we have two of them that are very, very powerful here in our chart. What a yod does is there are two planets here that are sextiling each other. It's two planets in a Ceres is now an planet. I forget that, and Pluto, and the Sun and Mars and Ceres are pressuring Pluto. So this is more pressure, more weight, more stress on her Pluto in her 7th house in terms of her relationships and how she is actually really meeting the world and expressing herself through the world. With Mars, with her activity, and with her Sun in Sagittarius. And Sagittarius really knows no bounds in terms of experience. It's very experiential. It's ruled by Jupiter, but Jupiter is also the co-ruler of Pisces. She's got Pisces rising. She's very, very, very active. This is a very active woman. She didn't sit still. She wasn't going to just stay home and knit sweaters. That just was not in her frame of reference. And Ceres, is her mom again. Ceres is in EA is our greatest personal loss. I don't know if it's just EA. I think that's across the board to understand Ceres in our chart. It's where Demeter lost her daughter Persephone down into the underworld. It was an iconic mother-daughter relationship, and when she lost her daughter, there was nothing worse in the world she could have lost than her daughter. And to some degree, this is how Jane felt at the age of 12 when her mother was gone, to go through the rest of her life without her mother. So this is all pressing on this need to self-empower herself. The other yod is coming from Eris and Saturn and her lunar south node up here to Vesta and Astrea. And this is also very powerful pressure. Saturn is her authority. In a sense, she became her own father. She had neither a father nor mother. Both of them were, absent from her life for different reasons. And Eris, again, to the need to some resentment, suppose, but also this force of nature, just pressing upon her authenticity. Vesta, her sacred commitment to herself, and the South Node, again, her history behind her, whether it was Roger Vadim and his flagrant, relationships during their marriage. She built this sacred commitment to herself, but Astrea was the goddess of justice, and she would dole out justice wherever she felt it was necessary, and that's what Jane did. It's a perfect example of who she is. So we can look at the lunar nodes, and she's got a north node here in Sagittarius in her 10th house, not surprisingly, and her south node here in Gemini in her fourth house. Well, we know that the 10th house is the public sphere. It's the social sphere. It's status, it's social status. She certainly achieved it. And in Sagittarius, there were no bounds to the success, whether it was her exercise videos, her many acting awards, or her marriages to really significant people. She had a number of tremendous careers and tremendous public status. She was destined. This placement of the lunar north node in Sagittarius in the 10th house, in Scorpio, with Scorpio on the cusp. Again, Pluto's sign on the cusp, destined her for prominent social status and multiple major public careers. There was an awareness to her as well in the Sagittarian that she was linked to something that was much more significant than herself. She was linked to the entire planet. She was a world traveler. She lived in France for many years, studied in Paris, took her famous trip to Vietnam at all costs, almost the cost of her career during the Vietnam War, to fight for a cause that she felt was important. It's her philosophical thinking, Sagittarius, and it's how she can adapt. Very adaptable. Sagittarius is probably the most adaptable sign. Adapt to the necessity of survival relatively quickly. She had this instinct to just be able to bounce back. She had a globalized belief system. But Sagittarius is also needs to convert people. She didn't want to convert people religiously. She wanted to convert people to peace and kindness and against war and against prejudice is what she wanted to convert. And this also ties in with her, also ties in with her moon in Leo and her sun in Sag. The moon is in a disseminating phase. The disseminating phase is where there's a need to get out and share themselves in the world in some way. And in Leo, she shared herself literally. And the Sagittarius, it was part of her Sagittarius 11th house experience. She shared herself with the community. She shared her ideas, her beliefs, her talents. She shared it all unflinchingly and unselfishly. It's also her compassion. And as I said, it's her awareness of what's greater than herself. The lunar south node is her connection again, to her philosophies, but she was a great communicator, an actress, great actress. And she was about learning and teaching and writing and speaking. And she continues to reinvent herself through her ideas and personal philosophies. And again, all this fire in her moon and her sun, combination of Leo and Sagittarius can be a constant reinvention. So let me clear this again. So just to look at her ERIS down here again, her ERIS is stationed. When a planet stations, it drills down on that spot with great intensity. It's focused on that for an extended period of time. It's like holding a magnifying glass up to a leaf, focusing the sun on it until it bursts into flame. With her sun in Sagittarius and her moon in Leo, she often burst into flame. But here it is kind of tempered with the Saturn in Pisces, that it was compassionate. It was about compassion. It wasn't just raw anger. The fire burned within her, but it expressed herself. It was structured compassionately. Saturn is structure. And she was totally empowered to be her own authority. Here in the second house, that was her value. That was her priority. Was to be her own self-authority. And as I talked about Hygeia. It's interesting to think about Pallas. One of the things about Pallas is she was her father's daughter. She never married. She resisted all advances from all the male gods who approached her. Jane was not exactly like that. Jane was the exact opposite. She was quite sexually active, but she was the opposite of her father's daughter. It's still there. She eventually superseded his fame and his accomplishments in some way, perhaps. That's an opinion. I don't know that we can definitely verify that. But she was clearly, this nodal axis, she was clearly programmed for fame and fortune. Jupiter in Aquarius on her ascendant, this is her constant reinvention right here. Her inner voice was so loud in her head, if you would, so clear and so precise and so demanding, perhaps, in this Aquarian mode, in this rebellious mode, again, coming through this Capricorn outer shell, if you would, structured by Capricorn, or inner shell, outer shell, I'm not sure which way it is. But the point being, it was all structured by Capricorn. It was all held together in a Capricorn way. And she constantly reinvented herself. From one career, from one marriage, from one relationship to another, and became a better person each time. It wasn't just that she went from one to the other and bounced back and forth between people and different careers, but she actually grew in her soul. She grew in her consciousness, as she described in that opening quote. She became a better person over time. So let's excuse me. Let's take a look at some of the transits to her chart. So the first chart that I have here is another suicide, which was in July of 1950. And like this annotation, but it's confusing. So here we see that Pluto was conjunct her moon. The lunar north node was opposite Eris. Uranus was conjunct her Chiron and squaring Eris. Ceres, again, her mom, her great loss. She had this huge going on up here in her 11th house. Ceres, Chiron, and Hygeia over her natal Venus and Sun. And Vesta, sanitation is great, but it kind of fills the screen after a while. Where is her Vesta? Just bear with me here. Oh, her Vesta is right on Saturn and Eris. So you can see what was going on in her chart here by these angles. And Pluto on her moon. I forgot the most important one. Pluto was conjunct her moon. This was all the passing of her mother. So this is the chart of all through the 70s. She was very active. This is the chart for the day that this photo was taken when she was sitting on the anti-aircraft gun in Hanoi. And you can see there's a fire trine between Eris, Sun, South Node, and Neptune. The Sun South Node. This was, she was virtually blacklisted in Hollywood. People say, "Oh wow, I have a grand trine in my chart. Isn't that great?" Well, it doesn't quite work that way. It's the oppositions and the squares. Actually, got a little backwards. I'm sorry. This trines create couch potatoes, and grand trines can create a couch potato. This wasn't a couch potato situation, but this is a situation where this grand trine created some difficulty in her life as one of its aspects, one of its consequences. And they make us a couch potato. Things are too easy. Trines have to be proactively gone out to. We have to go out to meet them. We can't just sit back and say, "Oh, I have a trine. Everything's going to be great." They can actually pass unnoticed if we don't interact with them. It's the oppositions and the squares that get us off the couch, because we can't ignore an opposition or a square when it comes along. So you can see that she's got both of these in this chart. She's got Pluto opposite Eris and Saturn, clearly kicking her in the butt in terms of resentment with what's happening. It's right on top of her hygeia, which I said is her desire to basically heal the social injustices and the political injustices in the world. And then here's Neptune on her north node. And Neptune is our vision. Neptune is our ultimate truth, right on top of her soul intention. She had to go. She was compelled to go out there. She didn't care that it was going to be her undoing. Undoing is often a South Node word, but with Eris involved, again, there was no negotiation. She had to go, and she just had to have that moment, and she had to go there. Later, many years later, she actually apologized for all of it. She felt bad that she had hurt, the soldiers who were fighting there, the military who had lost their lives. But at the time, she was trying to save those lives, which is what she was about. We also have Saturn squaring her Neptune. I'll draw this one out for you. There's her Saturn. Here's her Saturn, and it's opposite her Neptune. Is it? No. Bear with me. Get a little bug-eyed when you sit and look at all these charts. Oh, yeah. Here's the square. It's Neptune from Saturn. So again, she's got Neptune on her north node, Saturn squaring her Neptune. All this Neptune going on. Her vision was just very clear and very structured, and there was just no compromise with it. She was going to go where she was going to go. And Neptune was also trining her Pluto. We said that in this grand trine. So here's another whole aspect of Jane, and it was quite a popular one. She was quite eye candy for many years. She was a beautiful woman, and it was probably part of the reason why her exercise videos were so popular. But she literally made her name with this for many years. And so here again we have Neptune. Neptune is excuse me. Neptune is conjunct her sun. Is that right? No, this is not right. Excuse me, it's her lunar south node. I'm looking at the wrong part of my notes here. I'm sorry. It's her lunar north node. It's her lunar north node, which is squaring Eris. And again, we can say, well, why was this square, such a successful thing? Because it was conjunct her moon, and what was happening here, this is her north node, not her south node this time, and it's squaring Eris. She just wanted to do something very, very different. And it's, Saturn is here as well. And the moon is here, how she saw herself. Her whole personality was evolving, was changing, was morphing as a result into a whole new version of herself. And then Uranus down here, Uranus is conjunct her north node. Again, Uranus and Aquarius is the polarity to Leo. And Leo is our personality. It's how we project ourselves in the world. It's how we we take our self-image that from Cancer that preceded Leo. We project that as in Leo. We project that out as our personality, and its polarity. The polarity to Leo is in Aquarius is who we want to become, and it is our planet of reinvention. It's how we invent ourselves. We know what Uranus is about technology. Well, we have our own technology, our own inventions, our own personal inventions about ourselves. And we do it consciously or unconsciously. Sometimes we back into it. Sometimes we step into it consciously. But either way, that's what Uranus is doing for us, is helping us reinvent ourselves. And then we have the lunar south node here, conjunct Mercury. Again, in the 12th house. So it's a very Neptunian event because it's the 12th house. Her Mercury is there. Again, it's about her communication. It's about her speaking. And Eris is also squaring Mercury, and transiting Eris is trining Mercury. So there's all this pressure on our Mercury to go out and use her voice, use some new ideas in order to invent this. And it, again, became the most popular VHS series of the century. This is her meeting with, beginning of her friendship with Lily Tomlin in 1980, when they filmed 9 to 5. And again, you can see up here this stellium. Actually, it's yes, we can call it a stellium. Opposite her Saturn Eris. Again, just triggering it and lighting it up like a Christmas tree. And then she had Neptune again is on her Venus. Again, her priorities changed. It's about friendship, about her relationship. All of these things happened. Again, Eris again had to do with this lifelong relationship, and again with her work, because it was one of her best known movies, and so it was a great box office success. So what if we come away with, how do we work with Eris in the second house? So just in general, our natal charts are imprints that hold the schedule of people and circumstances that are going to appear over time, over the course of our lifetime. In the bardo, in concert with our higher self, the schedule's laid out. As I said here, I'm jumping ahead of my story, but our lives are going to unfold on schedule. And that's what astrology tells us. That's what the real beauty and value of astrology is, because it shows us that schedule. It's not predetermined. The events The arrival of the people and the circumstances perhaps is predetermined, but not the outcome. The outcome is still up to us. And elemental frameworks supports the house placement of ERIS, as I showed you. That all of the earth energy, all the Capricorn, Virgo, and Taurus that was in her chart, that was channeled through her, all the fire that she had in her personality. ERIS defines a person's values and priorities. So with ERIS there, those values and priorities are going to be accentuated. They're going to be elevated. They're going to be advanced and enlarged and really emboldened. Our values and our priorities determine what we believe, and they format our understanding of the world around us, and they become our choices and our behavior. We act according to what our priorities are. And transits from outer planets to ERIS trigger the significant life events for us. They're clearly our triggers. And it's an important point in the chart that we've only begun to learn about and to study. There's much more information that I think will be revealed as time unfolds. And the evolutionary state of the individual, as I say, determines the expression of those transits, because facilitating and challenging transits to ERIS can express as both positive and negative influences. And again, it depends on the consciousness that's brought to it and the intention that's brought to it. And the outcome of those challenges are not predetermined. It's how we react or respond when these circumstances appear, when these people show up, these relationships show up, as to whether they will be positive or negative. Next month, ERIS in the third house, we're going to look at Alan Watts, who was clearly one of my favorite thinkers, mystics, writers, role model. Going to dive into his life and his chart next month. This is how you can reach me. I do consultations from an evolutionary astrology perspective. We can help you find your purpose, find your passion. We're here for a reason. We didn't just land here by accident. There's a reason we're here. An evolutionary astrology reading will help you identify what that purpose is, where your passion is, and how you can go about beginning to achieve it, or if you're already there, how you can enhance it. I do astrological weather reports daily, weekly, monthly, annually, constantly writing forecasts. You can read them on my website, evolutionaryastrology.com. I'm on Facebook and YouTube, on my own evolutionary channel, and also on the EA Zoom channel. And you can use my phone number and my email address. Feel free to email me, call me. Love to hear from you. And I'd also love any feedback you have about this talk. Did you love it? Did you not love it? What did it miss? What was it about it perhaps that you liked or found it useful and important? Namaste. See you next month or sooner.